Morena and good morning.
Good morning.
Turn the volume on, I'll start again. Morena and good morning and welcome to our council meeting for the 1st of June. And to open our meeting, welcome Bobby, nice to see you again. And if I'll hand it over to you to open our meeting, please.
Your worship, it's indeed an honor and a privilege to be here on behalf of the Christian Leaders Fielding Network and the Churches of Fielding. Let us pray. Loving God, thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today. Thank you for your many and abundant blessings. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our callings, the sustenance and for friendship. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing appropriate responsibilities. In the scriptures, you have said that citizens ought to obey the governing authorities since you have established those very authorities to promote peace and order and justice. Therefore, I pray for our mayor, for the various levels of city officials, and in particular for this assembled council. I'm asking that you would graciously grant them wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times, a sense of the welfare and true needs of our people, confidence in what is good and fitting, the ability to work together in harmony, even when there is honest disagreement. I pray for the agenda set before them today. Please give an assurance of what would please you and what would be on behalf of the district of Manawatu. It is in your most blessed name we pray. Amen. Amen. And if I could just take the opportunity to say that the St. Paul's Church here in Fielding has really enjoyed the working relationship and the friendship that it has enjoyed not only with the churches in Fielding, but also with the district council. Preparations are underway for St. Paul's to be celebrating its 150 years next year in the weekend of 25 and 26 of May. And so we're really looking forward to that. And that has only been possible because of the understanding, the working relationship that we've had with everybody in the community. And so I want to thank you. I couldn't wait to share that piece of news with council this morning. And so thank you, your mayor.
Thank you, Bobby, for that, and we wish you well. And we're also looking to put some community celebration together around 150 years. So really, it'd be really great to add the Christian Leaders Network and others to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, this morning we have no apologies. Welcome Councillor Campbell on Zoom. Item 3, requests for leave of absence. We have a recommendation there for that Councillor Colin McFadden's request for leave of absence for the 23rd to the 30th of June 2023 be approved. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Ford. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Item 4 is the confirmation of minutes. We have a recommendation. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Your Worship, I move that the minutes of the council meeting held 18th of May 2023 be adopted as a true and correct record.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Short. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against? The motion is carried. Item 5 is declaration of interest. Any of the items on today's agenda that any of our elected members may wish to declare.
Yes.
Councillor Quigley.
We're talking about infill. What's its official name?
Development
So
contributions.
11.2.
I've sent a letter in for that, so I dare say that puts me out for that one.
Thank you. Noted. Any further? Thank you. So we move to public forum and welcome Mr. and Mrs. McIntyre. Angela, come and join us at the table. Angela is going to, she has a presentation there up on the screen to take us through regarding roading in the northern part of the district. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here and taking the time to hear our needs up in your northern region. Is the button in the middle? Is that the one? Thank you. And is it just that middle one? No, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. Otara Road and State Highway 1 Junction Turning Bay. There needs to be safety for road users. So I'm going to talk about that this morning, and also the fixing of the Otara Bridge and the alternative route that you have put in place while the bridge is broken. Okay. Oh, whoops, how do I go back? It must be that one. Okay. This photo was taken because I had a police officer come and see me at an event and says, I just had to come down here and see because you're backed up right on State Highway 1 and it's pretty dangerous. So I went outside and I took this photo. This was going into McIntyre Reserve and we have many events there, large events, and a few of them are, and they also go across to the White Cliff Boulders and out towards Rangawahia. This is the Owenidi and Hunterville districts. They have 1,000 people, 280 of them are horses. So there's horse floats and trucks turning there into this corner. We have Owenidi Kids Hunt, Rangatiki Tough Kids, fireworks, fundraisers, cross countries, dog trials, Rewa Sports, Pony Club shooting, the shooting club, all sharing contractors come from the Rangatiki region across to our Manawatu side. And there's a huge economic impact on the region with the bridge being out. I rang Wanganui Sports and I asked them how they got on with their events, and they have feedback surveys. And because I've only got 10 minutes, you'll need to read that yourself. And it explains exactly what happens on State Highway 1 when there's a major event. And so I'm going to flick through to the next slide. There's 705 competitors, that's excluding family members and bits and pieces that come across there, and it explains the risks really well. And we face this every time we use this intersection. This is an access point, a river access point at Jeff Duncan's. He has 100+ people ring him each year to ask to use this access, although he considers it to be public land. People use it for camping, swimming and jet boating and the like. There are many people who don't ring him up and use it because it is a public access point. The White Cliff Boulders, there's 1,200 visitors per year. 1,000 of them are tourists. 200 of them are local schools and groups, etc. They use the bridge. Buses can't get across. They do have to go round. The shoulders are often blocked for vision. You can see the car that's parked at the junction. We just can't pull in safely to turn right. If there was a yellow line there, because people pass 100 kilometres or more, if there was a yellow line there immediately before a turning bay is put in, that would be a lot safer for us turning right, or people turning from Otara right to head north. And that's a reasonably cost effective and minimal effect for people, in a solution that I think could be done immediately. If you look to the bottom there, there's a young man on a motorbike and the truck is parked there. You can see a car coming past, but because there's a corner slightly above there, we find it's really difficult to see, and that puts the cyclists and the road users turning right and left in serious danger. I drove the school bus some years ago, and this was my biggest fear, driving across and turning to head towards Flat Hills, because, you know, I had 17 children on board, and up to 1,700 children, should I say, and it was really scary because, you know, it's a big risk there. And it's also got the railway line, and so that makes it really dangerous if we've got cars backed up, and especially if there's an event and stuff like that. So it's quite significant. the Onslow turning bay down in by the ONIT pub is a dead end. There's no tourists go there, and it's quite safe. This is the main route and the access point into the Manawatu, and it's got no turning bay. It does not make sense. Speed cameras are often parked there as well. And so we have a lot of trouble with pulling in, backing out. Police vehicles are also parked there. There were deaths on Toi Toi Road and Te Hoia. Please excuse my pronunciation if that's wrong, down in Rata. There was deaths, and that's when they put turning bays in. We don't want to have a death before that happens. There are deaths that have occurred, 5 deaths, there's some crosses out at the junction. That happened many years ago. It was a family. We need that urgent fix on this bridge, and the reason being is my understanding is it's the only single span bridge that is not affected by the riverbed that feeds the Manawatu. And if there's earthquakes, liquefaction or slash or anything, if it's a serious flood, like in the 2004, this might be the only route for people to go. When there's emergencies, lives are at risk. And we recently had a woolshed fire and it burnt down. There's no way, and that's only just probably the first house after the bridge. Yeah, livable house, should I say. Harper, our granddaughter there, she's a kid, she needs a kidney transplant. She's on 11 to 12 hours of dialysis a night. So if there's a power outage, we need access pretty immediately with trucks and bits and pieces if necessary. So her life could be at risk when she stays with us. The suspension bridge is designed to move. Has the damage occurred because the ends have been restricted in movement? We only got it fixed, I think, in 2018. Is that correct? I think so.
Correct, yes.
Yes. So it's been there for years and years and years, and then it seems to be issue within a very short time fixing. The bridge maximum weight is 6,000 kilograms. This trailer happened to be measuring the road with a tape measure, and he came and he says, look, I didn't know these people. They were Rangatiki mobile crutching, and I'm not sure where you'd fit a cyclist, because this is a cyclist trail, and I don't know where you'd pass with an ambulance if you're on priority 1 or 2 trucks passing, but it's very, very narrow, and you can see that the water table is full of rocks, bigger rocks, so it's really quite dangerous to pop into there to allow extra room. 2 cars can't pass. And if you look at the bottom picture, that slump on the road's been there for a wee while, and you can see that the water travels across the road. There's now a gouge in the road, comes down and goes right over there, which is going to cause a washout in that particular corner. It's very, you can see how wide it is. That is legally able to get over the bridge, but because of the chicanes, they're unable to. And he says it takes us an extra 45 minutes to get there. So the road at that point is only 3.5 metres, and that's including the water channel or water tabling to the side. This is the other alternative route. Well, this is the Mangamako Road. One's Cyclone Gabriel, one's another one which was the recent reports, and then there's 2 others from years previous. I'm not sure how you're going to get an electric car through there. I'd be quite interested to see, but this road floods regularly. The GPS often sends a tourist to Vinegar Hill that way. And if there's a crash that occurs on State Highway 1 or State Highway 54, this is the alternative route that they've got. These are 2 different bridges, by the way. I just want to point that out. This is the road. There's a slip on there currently. It's got a single cone. around, and it's been there for a reasonable period of time. We've got tractors in there cleaning it because we can't wait to have the council come through, and we do our part and we help in the community. This is another corner. Flooding, block culverts and slips on the Manawatu Road. Trucks struggle to manoeuvre around narrow corners. As you can see, these are two different times. The bottom right-hand one is actually taken a couple of days ago. So it's the same scenario. The tabling's blocked, the water goes across the road, it goes around the corner, goes down, digs a gouge in the road, and then goes on, and most of the culverts are blocked. Down the bottom there, you can see the mud. It was up to my finger, my first joint in my finger. There's very low maintenance on the road. We need more metal, we need more grading, we need the culverts cleaned, and this is the alternative route for trucks, trailers, ambulance, and the like. Safety first. Manawatu Sand and Block Roads is a designated tourist route because it has a cycle trail. Te Araroa, the Kenneth brothers go from Cape Reinga to Bluff each year. In 2020, there was 980 riders. They go, also, I contact the Kenneth brothers every year because the cyclists do not keep left. I couldn't find my photo with all the marks of the cycles to show you how bad it is, and it's an accident waiting to happen. Someone will get injured, unfortunately, because the road is not suitable for being a cycle track, and the width it is. The alternative route for the emergency St John and Fire Service, Hunterville, Taihape, Martin, Fielding, St John's. Taihape Ambulance has a 5-hour turnaround. That's excluding coming on our road via the bridge or anywhere. The reason why I know this is I was a volunteer EMT for them. I have worked out of all of those stations. And if the rescue chopper is busy or the weather is bad, they can't get in. And if there's slips on the road or the flooding, the ambulances can't get through. So it's easy to assume that the chopper will be on hand, but it's not. And it was easy to assume that there's an ambulance on hand too, but it can't be. If Taihape and Owakuni are the only 4-wheel drive ambulances in the area, and so Taihape is higher. It's got 3 steps at the back. It would potentially get through the water, but Hunterville ambulance would not get through there. Okay. This is one of the bridges you saw in the first photos. It's 3.2 metres wide. Okay, if the bridge is not fixed within 12 months, the Manawatu and Sanded Block Road needs to be fixed to pre-sealed standards. That's 8 metres wide for trucks to pass safely. Emergency vehicles need that safety margin, especially on a priority call. At night time, you've got lights and you've got dust in summer, but you can't actually rely when you're reading roads on gravel roads. We look for things. Cyclists don't put up dust. They often have earplugs in. So there's things that we can't do and read from. If we've got tractors with hay bales or logging trucks and stuff, they've got communication. We can't communicate with them. So we do our part and we are good, safe road users. Now this bridge here, you can see it's broken on the side. It's now slumping. It's been fixed once before. I can't remember when it was, but it now makes noises when you cross it. But the left-hand wheel rut actually is slightly hollow and it's starting to wear again. So that bridge approach is actually starting to wear. So I want to let you know now before it gets really bad and we lose the bridge, because then we've lost that access. That's the only access point. Animal welfare. We have a really serious issue with this. We have deer, one of the few in, oh no, actually not, that's not true on the Manawatu side. And we sent a truckload away, and our deer truck driver is accredited. They're a husband and wife team. They are amazing and they know their animals. She said to us that detour away yesterday took up took me an extra hour and a half compared to normal. So many corners, I kept stopping every hour to check on them the whole way home, as not having good airflow in the first part of the journey is really stressful for them. Your deer never pant or get stressed. My front pen was panting the whole way back. That's from the extra corners, etc. Now, she has always carted our deer for many, many years. And so this is definitely an animal welfare issue. Because of the extra time, I've actually got my truck and trailer license. The logbook hours, they actually are an issue if they are late, an extra hour and a half. They can only fit one run in during the day. Usually they can get a couple, but because of this extra time, it's costing them. Our deer go to Rotorua to be processed. The alternative road, like Edge Hill, if there's a slip on there, that means that potentially they miss the scheduled time of meeting at the processors. So there's actually a huge extra cost to the farmer, to the truckies, to the processing. This is quite serious. It's an economical impact across the whole region. In fact, even New Zealand, because lots of people will be using the road. The rates. We accept the common pot of rates is for the regional greater good, but the Manawatu District Council determines the law and your regulations. Everyone should benefit from improvements. Sound infrastructure increases regional growth. We in turn expect that the outer district will contribute back to us to improve, not just fix. So our broken bridge needs to be improved if there's going to be issues, and it's the only main access point that is not affected by the riverbed. Unsealed roads. Dust from the roads affects people. There is widespread consensus that exposure to airborne road dust causes predominantly respiratory and cardio issues, ranging from subclinical changes, that's reduced lung function, to symptoms increasingly like coughing and asthma, and impaired activity. I only put this slide in because yesterday I went and visited our local iwi, and my elder said to me, you need to put this in. So she sent me photos. That's not beautiful mist. That's actually dust from the road, and that affects the animals. It clings to her house, and she's got asthma. And so there is an issue with that, and that's down Peka Road towards Whitecliff Boulders. Improvements for the greater good of the outer regions may include tar sealing and looking at ways in which we can reduce dust, especially on tourist routes. This is an example of our road. Our road is not Mangamaka Road, but this is common what happens during floods. Because of the poor maintenance, as in lack of culvert clearing, this section was fixed last year with a little slip. This is now major. Higgins rang me, and he's quite rude actually, and he says, but we cleaned those culverts last year. I was so floored, I didn't tell him, well, I wrote a letter to you, you war boys, for our culvert, which I'll show you a picture of, when I was in Starship Hospital with my daughter after. I'd taken photos before they graded the road 2 days, but because I had to go to Starship, I was unable to email. They had the grader come up the road, and right at this point down the second left, on the left-hand side, there's a rock there with marks on. That's the grader hitting the bedrock. And he came to a sudden stop, and I said, I would love to have videoed that so that you could have seen actually what kind of condition our roads are in. And so they fixed it beautifully. And now it's back to this. The top top left-hand one is before, the bottom one is when I was cleaning it. So you can see the culvert now. It runs and flows over. There's the next one down. We've got blocks all the way along there. Our road is an absolute mess. We're going to lose the road. It's only, oh no, I did measure it, but I can't remember, I didn't put it down. June 2022, you can see on the right there, it's down to the bedrock, sand rock. Absolutely not acceptable for a road. That point is very narrow and certainly needed. Now here, I believe that ratepayers' money is being wasted. Here's a Higgin trucks going past his sign. Okay, does 50 and 50 and 50 and 100 equal 250 kilometres per hour? Because I'm not quite sure how that is legal, is the first thing. There are 37 cones. Sorry, it says per day, but it's actually per week. So a 700 millimetre road cone is $9 per week. Okay, and a metre long, which they are, is $10 per week. And then each 50k sign is $17 per week. So why do we need 3? Why was it not covered? And how can a Higgins drive past? I just think that there is nonsense going on in the roads, and that's costing ratepayers. And I rang a highridge company to find those figures. Bring back the spade. Perhaps we should bring back the beige brigade too, because that's pretty cool, eh? I want to see culverts being cleaned out more often. I do this regularly on our road because our road is precious. It's infrastructure. It's essential to our business. It's essential to our lives. It's essential to our health, and it's essential to our region. We need dedicated crew members to go around and clean out culverts. Just go around and clean out culverts, perhaps a rolling digger with a small truck that they can just go along and clean out drains and get this so that we're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on fixing roads. There's our culvert that I explained before, and you can see the water coming directly down, and that was fixed last year. So the culverts were done last year. So I really encourage you to do the basics well and increase our productivity within our region.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. And well done on the presentation and the photos, etc. And we hear your frustration and we share that. And, you know, we know from our infrastructure roading team, the frustration we have all the time about allocating adequate budget for maintenance, etc., particularly when we have these weather events that continue to happen, and that takes that budget away for those weather events, and then waiting for Waka Kotahi to reimburse that funding. It is tough. I wondered if our infrastructure manager perhaps could just give us all an update on the Otara Bridge. Hamish.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, thank you, Angela, for that. And to repeat Mayor Helen's comments, we do share a lot of those frustrations. Otara Bridge, we've actually got contractors starting up there next week. There's been quite a lot of, I guess, office-based or sort of computer-based modelling of what went wrong and what needs to be done to fix it. So we've got contractors establishing next week. The intention is to take some of the hangers off and do some controlled testing of how strong they actually are. And then replacing the ones that we've taken off from there. The top section that's been buckled, that will be replaced shortly after that. We're expecting that work to be done at the latest by the end of August, or between July and August. From there, there's a further assessment as to what the actual weight capacity of the bridge will be. So that will certainly lift it from the 6 tonne, but exactly what we have to wait until we've done that work, and then we can further model it based on the lab testing that's been done of those hangers. And so from sort of July, August onwards, we can then make a plan as to what further works, if any, need to be done to bring it back up to full weight. And then there's a process of getting that work underway, the engineering behind it, and also the funding of that as well with our NZTA funding partner. So that's there's a couple of months of work ahead of us, and then there's another section after that. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamish, and of course weather dependent as well.
And hopefully no more cyclones in the meantime.
Yeah. And also, Angela, you know, going through the various roads and intersections you've talked about, this is a wider conversation than just MDC, obviously with Rangatiki District Council and also with Waka Kotahi. So those are conversations that need to continue along that way. Are there any questions of Angela before we close this topic? Councillor Balsky.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Angela did speak to me a little bit through the week because she was bringing in the Rangatiki Council as well, issues over there. But she did say that she did talk to Andy Watson about this, and he sort of referred her to here because of our our operational team does work for Rangatiki, so that's why that was brought in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you. More of a comment than a question. Thank you very much for your presentation. Your photos clearly showed all the issues. As you know, roading's biggest enemy is water, and we've had rather a lot of that in the last 12 months. And, you know, potentially that's the way life's going to be from now. So, but it is very timely because our roading contract is up for renewal or goes out to public tender in a few months' time. And one of the discussions we need to have is the KPIs around what is the minimum standard we're prepared to accept. So everything that you've said and showed to us today is very helpful for us to understand what the issues are on our gravel roads. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a question around economic benefit. You know, there's discussion going on about who pays for the costs and the repairs to the bridge. Economic benefit, so users of the bridge, and you were talking about the businesses you mentioned sharing transport, etc., were coming from Rangatiki over the bridge into Manawatu. So what's your thinking around the importance of that bridge for Rangatiki and the Manawatu?
Well, I actually, when it came to the submissions on the plan for Rangatiki District Council, I helped our local present one, and he said 90% of the people, there's a bit of a rush hour and he doesn't put animals on the road. He said 90% of the in the morning rush hour and at 6 o'clock in the evening till I can't remember what time it was, maybe 6:37, something like that. He said that 90% of it was going backwards and forwards from the Rangatiki. So in the morning there's a rush and then a rush back. So it's actually equally as important for each district. It is actually, yeah.
Thank you. That was the point I was trying to clarify, that it is a key link between both. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I just want to endorse the comments made by councillors. Thank you for taking the time and the passion that you have, and for the work that you do clearing and helping keep that road so it is usable. And as you've heard, it is a frustration for us all. How do we manage this? How do we lobby government, waka kotahi, to maintain what we've got? And that is a challenge for us. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
So moving on, no presentations this morning, no late items, no recommendations from committees or minutes from other committees. So we can go straight to officers' report. We're on 11.1, road stopping for 720 Main Drain Road, and we're on page 18. And welcome to Oliver. Welcome. We have your report. Take that as read and you're welcome to speak to it.
Cool. Thank you. Yes, so hello, Oliver Harper. I'm from Council's Regulatory Department. So today I'm here to talk to you about a road stopping application for 720 Main Drain Road. So for those of you who might not be aware of what a road stopping is, piece of land that is designated as road, council can decide that it's no longer needed for roading purposes, and it can be changed to freehold and disposed of. So in this instance, if you flick to page 24, we have an applicant at 720 Main Drain Road. They want to, or they've applied to close section 1 on that scheme plan. It's 167 square meters and it adjoins their residential property. And you'll be able to see that it actually, it's already informally used by them as their residential grounds. So basically they're just seeking to formalise an existing situation. So council has 2 processes that it can use to close roads. So first one is the Public Works Act, but that requires written approval from adjoining landowners. In this instance, we're using the Local Government Act because the applicant can't obtain written approval from the adjoining landowner. It's a bit of a special situation. The adjoining land, again, on page 24, you see in the scheme plan, it's a drain which is operated by Horizons. Whilst it's operated by Horizons, it's still in private ownership and the owners are deceased. So the Local Government Act, basically the difference from the Public Works Act is it sets out advertisement process and calls for any objections. So after discussing with Council's infrastructure team, we've confirmed that they do not believe it's going to be required for current or future use. There will be no financial implications for the council, so all costs associated with the closing will be met by the applicant. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank
Happy
you.
to take questions.
Thanks, Oliver. Open it up for questions, comments. It's pretty straightforward. Councillor Short.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's pretty straightforward. It's just tidying up what they're using anyway. What's the process for, you know, the rating and all that kind of thing going forward? That piece being amalgamated into their title. I mean, the whole thing gets revalued and.
Good question.
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. So if there's nothing further, we have those recommendations there on page 18. If I could have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Ford.
Yeah, Oliver, thanks very much for the way you've prepared this and the way you've explained it. It's really helpful. Thank you. I'd like to move that the Council A agree that approximately 167 square metres of unformed legal road land adjoining 720 Main Drain Road, Manawatu, shown as section 1 on the scheme plan attached in appendix 1, is not required for road purposes or a public work. B, authorise council officers to initiate the road stopping process for the unformed legal road in accordance with section 342 and schedule 10 of the Local Government Act 1974. C, delegate to the Chief Executive the power to formally approve the road stopping and issue the public notice to declare the portion of unformed legal road stopped, subject to all statutory requirements being met and with no objections being received. D, note that if objections are received, a further report will be presented to the council for consideration.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hadfield. Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put those motions. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motions are carried. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Oliver. Thank you for your work. So we move to item 11.2. This is the deliberations on the Development and Financial Contributions Policy 2021. And as our team are getting into place, just reminding councillors, this is the continuing the discussion around the deliberations on the submissions that council received and the work that our team has done with the proposed changes to the policy. So today is looking to discuss and choose whether to accept those changes so that it could then come back to council for adoption. So welcome, Shannon. Nice to see you again. So thank you. We have we've had our discussion on this previously, and we have the paper in front of us. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Worship. So just a reminder, councillors, that this
particular deliberation is in respect of the submissions that council received as part of the process of notifying a reviewed development contribution policy. And the responses to those submissions are contained in the appendices to your report. So that's the purpose of today. And then we take whatever council decides to do with respect to those submissions, and then we'll revise the report accordingly and then bring it back for adoption. So today is deliberations. There also have been some minor alterations done through the development contribution by staff, which Shannon will run through as we go through the process. So, also draw your attention to recommendation number 5. There will be amended wording for that. In the existing wording, it relies on us bringing back conclusive financial calculations that are like to the long-term plan. That's not the case. Those prices and those schedules will come back in 2 weeks' time if we decide to proceed with the adoption of the revised policy. So we're not going to leave it a year. We are going to bring it back. So there's some revised wording that will go up for recommendation 5 when we get to that part of the report.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure how you want to do this, whether you want Shannon just to run through first those staffing changes that we made, and then we can take questions in respect to those submissions. So there are a number there. I suspect the one that will draw some attention will be the submission made by Mr. Key. And there's a response, and also Shannon will be able to give you some more in-depth legal analysis on the submission. So,
Thank you. Yeah, if Shannon, you could just highlight those specific changes that have been proposed.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's good to be here again. I do want to draw your attention to what I consider to be a fairly comprehensive council officer report, which does step you through, in my view anyway, the process you need to undertake today. But this DC policy has been on a bit of a journey, and it sets out the engagement review process, the consultation process, the fact that there have been 10 submissions. 9 of those submitters were heard on the 18th and 19th of May, 2021, and then there were some initial council deliberations. Your directions at those deliberations were for council officers to go away and do some further work and seek some advice around some issues you've identified, and officers did that. They reviewed the policy, which has resulted in what I describe as administrative or user-friendly type changes to ensure that the policy is doing the work you need it to do in the most simplest way. And those reflect discussions we've had around this table previously. So I'll take you through those shortly. In addition, there are draft responses to the submissions included in the report for your consideration as well. But perhaps if we move to, it's at paragraph 3.4 of the report, page 22 of the original council officer council agenda. Really, I will just highlight for you why I say these are administrative and really not significant in terms of their effect. They don't substantially change the policy intent. They clarify matters and provide additional support for your users of the policy. But they're there with the bullet points. The definition of allotment has been expanded to ensure that it's really clear that undevelopable lots aren't caught by this policy. There have been some new definitions inserted in line with the national planning standards, and that's to ensure consistency across your policy and your district plan, which is important. There has been a reclassification of a subcatchment reference, which again is not a substantial change because there was some inconsistency with parts of the policy where they referred to that catchment area.
Can I just interrupt? We just need to get on the same page. And Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you refer to the original report, page 22, you're referring to council page 20.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I didn't. Has there been an update?
It's on 33 of the existing.
There won't be any changes to that report in that regard. So go to page 33. My apologies, Councillor.
Thank you. So we're on page 33.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was on page 22 of the report.
Me too. Yep. Thank
Good that
you.
you bought that report. It shows that you have read both. They didn't change in that regard. So I am speaking to the same text that is at page 33. Apologies for that confusion. So I'm at bullet point 3 on page 33. Paragraph 3.4. There was at paragraph 32 of the policy, there's been a provision reinserted, just again clarifying where additional further development contributions would be required, where a change in use generates additional demand. That's just consistent with the language in the Act. There's been an update to clarify at paragraph 33 that any adjustment for inflation will be in accordance with paragraph 16 of the policy. So that's just a cross-referencing change. We've removed duplication at paragraph 37. That paragraph has been deleted as it simply referred to powers that the council had under the Act. And you'll remember that this follows direction that the policy needs to be user-friendly, it needs to be simple. We're trying to avoid unnecessary confusion or text for users. We've updated paragraph 47 to put the full term gross floor area instead of a acronym. And that's a particular favourite of your chief executive. He doesn't like acronyms.
Yeah.
The amendments to paragraph 40 allow developer agreements as a substitution for development contributions and for circumstances set out in the draft policy. So again, that just makes really clear that this council uses developer agreements in accordance with the Act and sets out where the full amount may not be required. There's a clarifying note, paragraph 54, to clarify that credits will not be provided for undevelopable lots or where following an amalgamation, boundary adjustment or subdivision consent, a previously undevelopable allotment is then of a size that it can be developed. So this really just follows on from the point, trying to avoid any confusion or ambiguity around what is caught by the DC policy and what isn't. Paragraph 71 has been reworked to clarify what building work is excluded from triggering development contributions. Again, just being really clear about what is in and out. We have amended paragraph 76 so that it's clear that applications for postponements will only be accepted in certain circumstances. And then we have referred to the interest rate component. There's a change around how the interest rate component will be equal to the Reserve Bank 90-day bank bill rate. So again, that's what council officers are currently doing. It's just making sure that the policy replicates, uses the language that has already been used within your council regime. There is a clarification that the developer is required to pay for the initial valuation of land to determine the development contributions for reserves. So there was already a requirement in the policy that this evaluation would be undertaken. It just clarifies who pays. That's also standard practice already. Second to last bullet point, we've clarified under the assessment section how the draft policy responds where a development does not generate additional demand. So it's including some wording there around waivers and reductions. And then the wording of paragraph 88, and I can take you to this wording if you feel appropriate. If you haven't already seen it, happy to take you there directly, but to any of these points, but the wording of paragraph 88 has been amended to clarify when a development agreement may be appropriate. Again, just trying to really signal in the development contribution policy some of the questions that either came out of discussions before council or from your community in terms of how the DC policy is used. So that's why these are administrative. They're not affecting the actual intent of the policy. It's just about how it's used. So those are the changes that officers have made post deliberation, your initial deliberations. The only other addition I will note is that council officers have revisited the hue allocation for 2-lot rural subdivisions where there is a balance allotment retained And where there is a legal mechanism that prevents that balance allotment from being further developed, there is a recommendation from council officers that though that subdivision be 0 rated within your policy. So that does not mean that the policy doesn't treat that 2-lot subdivision as generating demand. It does. But in certain circumstances where those legal mechanisms are in place and there is no further residential development, the 0 rating recommendation of officers reflects how that balance allotment is intended to be used and how that balance allotment is protected for that use. In the event that that legal mechanism was uplifted, the DC policy would apply at the next stage of development. And those changes are set out at paragraph 35 at page 33 and specified further at 3.6. I'm happy to take you to those parts of the policy if you wish. But essentially what's happened is that the table, table 6 at paragraph 45 of the policy, that already sets out a method by which hues are calculated for certain activities, and it includes retirement villages, for example. That table has now been populated with subdivisions of specified productive rural land as well, and it also shows the 0 rating hue there as recommended. So it builds on an original approach in the DC policy to calculate hues in a different way for certain activities. It includes that particular activity within that table 6. And we've also included a definition of specified productive rural land. Lawyers love definitions. But this was necessary so that it's really clear what specified productive rural land means. And that's where it sets out that that has a particular meaning, which is where the legal mechanism is captured. So that's how that 0 rating is delivered. And it essentially reflects the fact that the balance allotment is legally required to be maintained in a productive land use. So those are collectively the additional post-consultation changes recommended by officers. And we can move on to submissions unless there's questions about those now. I'm in your hands, Your Worship, is how you want to take this forward.
Thank you. Let's see if there's any questions or comments on what you've just taken us through. Councillor Ford.
Thank you. Just on the point that you've just been discussing, Shannon, and the specific description of productive land use or productive farmland.
Yes.
What I'm trying to get clear in my mind is how that is different in terms of creating extra development from, say, 2 houses on a title that get subdivided, or say a block of 6 flats that are 6 rental flats on one title that get perhaps unit titled and sold off as own your owns, or even 2 commercial properties on a title and subdivided. So on one part, none of my examples are rural, so they're not productive from a rural sense, but they're not. But to me, there is a similarity that they're not creating extra demand because they all exist. All we're doing is subdividing. Is there a comment there to help me get that clear?
It's fairly akin to that situation. I haven't addressed it specifically, Councillor. It seems to me that it would fall more into potentially getting closer to an infill type development opportunity. But again, if that was the case, there is the ability for that particular application to be considered through the existing pathways under the Act as reflected in the policy. Which enables applications to be considered on a case-by-case basis if there are circumstances that say that it should be treated differently or that its particular circumstances doesn't generate demand. It means that it needs to be looked at in a different way. As we've discussed, there are already legal mechanisms that enable that to occur. Council officers do have that ability on application or through discussions with council officers. So I would be encouraging that applicant to take that case forward. But in terms of how it's treated within the policy, that hasn't been provided for, only the rural exception.
Yeah, that's my possible concern, that we're favouring one class of land over another. And if there was a good reason for it, I'm not sure that there is.
I think the key thing we have to think about here is in the changes to the specified product rural land, it's not that there's no demand created. There is a demand created. It's about the timing and the setting aside, if you like, of the payment of the development contribution amount. Now, in a rural and urban situation, that unit of demand assessment is exactly the same. As soon as those titles are split into, there's a unit of demand created. What this changes is the ability through a mechanism on title for that to have a 0 rating until such time as it's developed. Now, that's the bit probably where you say there might be an inequity between rural and urban, but there is provision to have an agreement in an urban situation where you could delay the payment of the contribution until such time as development occurred. And we've done that on the bigger subdivisions quite often. So, I don't know whether that's helpful.
Appreciate the what you've said.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you. I suppose it's kind of a follow-up to Councillor Ford's comment then. I'm quite satisfied if there's mechanisms for people to contest case-by-case basis. In the spirit of simple and user-friendly, would that be clear to people that if it's not, if they had a case that could be contested, would they do so? How clear is our policy on that?
Well, the policy reflects the fact that under the Act, there's the ability to have reconsideration or objection processes as to how that policy is applied. The reconsideration processes are fairly confined. You can't challenge the policy through there. It really is whether there was some sort of error or the policy hasn't been applied correctly as opposed to the fundamentals of the policy. But what the Act encourages a council to do is that you need to consider whether there are features of the particular development that mean that, and I'm reading from it, on their own or cumulatively with those of other developments would substantially reduce the impact of the development on requirements for community facilities. So the ability for an officer to look at that can be taken into account through an objection process if necessary. There are also developer agreements. There are also opportunities for applicants to come and see council about them. And I think that the policy does signal that those opportunities are available in various places. So I'm looking at page 20 and 21. And then we've talked about where there are also the opportunities for developer agreements and the like earlier on. I'll just find the page. Paragraph 76, there's the postponement and remission section. And at paragraph 86, which is pages 24, 25 and 26 of the policy development agreements. So there are clear sections about different opportunities for applicants to come and see council about those matters.
Okay, and does that come at additional cost for the developer?
That if an agreement is entered into, yes, because the agreements require legal instruments to be placed on title to safeguard council's position. In other words, someone can't sell the land and then the new owner doesn't know about contributions and finds out at a later date that there's a contribution owing. So we do insist, but we also, we put first call mortgage instruments on the title so that when the land sells, council gets paid. And so we're not left without the development contributions. And that comes at a cost to have those things prepared and put on title. Just your other point, Councillor, this is quite a complex document. We have tried to make it as user-friendly as we can, but I'm the first to accept that a layperson would find it very difficult to find their way through this policy, which is why our team offers the pre-consent process where they will work through with people the intricacies of development contributions. I've had a good read of that, post some comments, and look, it would be very difficult to make it much simpler without leaving out big chunks of stuff that could impact on the developer or council.
Okay. I'd also note that the template for the agreement was the DIA template that was prepared as best practice. And so we've used that as a starting point, what council did, and then modified it to further simplify or to clarify things that are relevant to your district. And I'd also point out around the postponement and remission section, like even any council around New Zealand, you have a discretion around whether or not you enable postponements and remissions. This council at this stage is electing to, and that reflects what you want to do with your business community and your developers. Other councils I'm aware of do not provide that opportunity. So there is flexibility built into your policy. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that we've tried to make it simple and user-friendly.
Councillor Short.
Thank you, Shannon. So on Tuesday this week, we had a private plan change for Rongotea South, which is under consideration. And there was a few things that sort of came to light with the implementation of new legislation, one of them being the National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Soils, which only came into effect in October. And regional councils have 3 years to do intensive soil mapping. And the timing for this particular plan change, which was lodged before the legislation came into place, there was a bit of a gap there. So both parties, being the applicant and the council, had to get independent soil testing of the site. And I just wondered with some of the other legislation that's, the urban development strategy, etc., whether there's some gaps while we catch up. And the other one, of course, is because the National Policy Statement went as far as Class 3, which for our district is quite problematic because we have a lot of high quality soils. We're now pausing and doing a Manawatu growth strategy, which will identify areas of growth around the edge fielding and around villages. And if we're going to get applications in the meantime until we've actually technically adopted those areas, it is going to be very expensive for developers. I have no idea what it would have cost this applicant the other day, but a lot.
And if you want to throw other reforms in the mix, such as, we don't know in 2 or 3 year time who's going to end up getting development contributions for stormwater and water and sewerage. It may well be another entity. So who knows? We're in a really uncertain area. So all we can do now is plan for, what we've got and take council's best interests at heart and our community as well. So it's not going to be simple in that planning space over the next few years. I guess a lot of that depends on what happens in October as well. So.
Councillor, I guess if your question was whether or not the DC policy has accounted for those changes, it hasn't explicitly, but it doesn't need to at this stage either. I think the DC policy has a very specific purpose. The broader policy and planning implications that you've referred to will remain at play, and you will address them through other mechanisms. But I do acknowledge the challenges with the NPS highly productive. It's something that is top of mind for many councils and many of my clients.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, a question in regard to when is the title created, or which block of land. If you've got a title and you've got a block of land and you subdivide off a piece of that block, which is the allotment? Is it the piece that's taken off? Which is the principal title? Is it the piece that's taken off, or the remaining block of land that hasn't been, that remains?
But I think that there's an initial hue that's already ascribed to the lot that's got the house on it. So the balance lot is the new lot that is created in terms of the DC policy and the creation of household equivalent units,
So why is
unit equivalents, I should say.
the remaining the principal title, the base title? Why does the house or the allotment become the primary title that the remaining land is subdivided from, whether that land be bigger in area and bigger in value?
Because of the existing
I
entitlement.
think there's a difference between what you're talking about, which is the legal mechanism for subdividing the land, the title aspect, and we're talking about how the DC policy sits over top of that. So when the subdivision occurs, there's an existing house, and that already under your policy has a hue ascribed to it because it's already there and it's already got demand associated with it. What's created is a balanced lot, which has the ability to be subdivided and developed further. And that's where the new demand and the demand is generated from, and the new hue is allocated under the policy. So in this case, the DC policy treats that balance allotment as the developable allotment, and therefore the one that the hues or the future hues will be ascribed to. So I think that you're conflating, with respect, councillor, the legal mechanism that deals with subdivision and the titles that goes through a planning process, and what the DC policy does. If I have understood you correctly, and of course you're welcome to.
Then a response to that would be that you don't need to subdivide to further develop.
No, and it's right, but you would then also attract the development contributions under future building.
And that would be fine. That would not be an issue. The concern, hang on, let me come back to that. You mentioned that let the buyer beware, and that there is a possibility that if there is not an application made or a register made on the existing title, that a person could buy that, and then they would be faced with DC charges if they chose to develop in the future. Well, that, quite frankly, I can't see why council needs to be involved in placing a convent on that to stop that development, or to place a charge on that. It is up to the developer or the person that wishes to build to find out. Let the buyer beware, put it that way. That if a person wants to develop a title, then it's up to them to ensure that they are aware of the charges, possible council charges that would go with that.
I think that's right, councillor, from a private person's perspective. You're viewing that as the person, as the applicant, or the person in the community. From a council perspective, and I've dealt with several of these from a council perspective, and what happens is that council gets caught in the middle, because it's the obligation to council that goes missing. It's not the effect on the private individual. So what happens is that the transfer of land occurs, and if there's not an alert to the future party, they purchase the land, and then there becomes a dispute between them and the vendor. And council is unfortunately caught in the crossfire, and it's council that loses out, because the money is actually owed to council, but the money is not paid because it gets caught up in a private process. So this is protecting council's interests. So my strong advice to council has been that enables council to have a mechanism to put that purchaser on notice that there is a debt owing to council, and it helps in the recovery of that money if a dispute eventuates. It also reflects the approach we've taken in terms of developer agreements, and where postponements or remissions are entered into by council. That's the purpose for putting a mortgage over the title, to make sure that council's interests are protected. Because I have seen on a few occasions, historically now, prior to us putting into place these sorts of mechanisms, the situations where council has incurred legal fees and in trying to recover DCs that became caught up in disputes between vendors and purchasers. And I don't want to have to keep helping council in those situations. So it's my advice that we do take these steps to protect council's interests.
And actually this council did, and which is what led to us putting the instruments on titles some years ago. We had to forego, if you like, rather substantial development contribution, because the it wasn't picked up until this property had gone through a number of owner iterations. And then the legal mechanisms and process to go through to get that money was, we wouldn't have made any money from it. So in the end, we had to forego the contribution. So that's what actually led to us putting these legal instruments in place. And that's probably 10 years ago now.
But not that old.
No, 5+.
But I can't see why the vendor should have to pay for a charge that he doesn't want or they don't want. Now,
with respect, councillor, they are getting the benefit of not having to pay the DC immediately. So
But-
there is a benefit to them, and you're protecting your interests in enabling them to not have to comply with part of the DC policy immediately.
we're putting a charge on the landowner, the current landowner, on a service that he doesn't require. And that charge can be quite substantial. And I don't believe unless you receive some service for that charge, you should not have to pay it. And I can't see why council, before a building permit or before a permission to develop, is not able to charge the person doing that work there and then. Okay, so if you want to build a house or some sleeping or a factory or whatever, then part of the terms of being able to build is to pay for the DC charges. And that could be 2 or 3 vendors down the line. Why should one person have to pay that initially up front and pay the legal costs of having that charge up against their remaining land? Because it's simply, to me, I won't use the word fair, but it's unjust, because there is no service being provided by council for that. If council hasn't got the mechanism to charge DC contributions at a later date, then that's where they need to look at, not up front.
The policy is currently drafted in a way, as it has been for some time, consistent with best practice, which is that the DC is taken at the earliest opportunity through the planning process, whether it be at the subdivision stage, the building consent stage, or the service connection stage. That's consistent with policies all through New Zealand. And there are opportunities for an applicant to be able to address through council at what stage that DC is taken. But if they do look to defer it, then there are mechanisms put in place to protect it. If you're talking protect the recovery of the charge, it's fairly standard practice in my experience.
Well, yeah, that becomes a substantial cost to the person that's selling.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you. Changing subjects. 3.3, which is the second part of it on page 33 of the current agenda. Now, this is relating to the submissions from La Casa and the Quigleys. So it relates to the infill development. I'm just wanting to be clear in my head where we've got to. The thing is, we have been talking about this for 3 years, so I'm getting a little bit lost. We had a proposal basically using north, south, east and west streets as an infill and an incentive to do infill. And then I think it was following the public consultation, we were concerned about stormwater issues and we put things on hold pending a stormwater report. From what I'm reading here, we are looking to still proceed with the incentive with a 0.65 discount, or a 35% discount on the Three Waters aspects of the development contribution. And it does appear that the area has widened to incorporate, I think, the properties east of East Street. So I'm just really wanting, have I got that right, or have I got that wrong?
I'd have to take advice from officers, but I don't understand the area has widened.
So it was East Street?
A good indication of this consideration is under the response to the Quigley submission. That should explain it better. And I'll let Shannon and Shane answer about the discount.
So my issue really is looking at the little plan, say on page 44, which is the response to the Quigleys. And I think it's the same as the one to the La Casa. So we've got pink is the Fielding urban area. And then the goldy colour is the Fielding intensification area. So as I recall it, the boundary was East Street. Now, if that was the case, the likes of Wellington Street, Nelson Street, South Street East, etc., Paul Street, Tingy Avenue, Fairview Avenue, etc., they would all be in pink. But there's no pink to the east of that urban and Fielding intensification area. So I'm just trying to clarify what we're doing. Did we increase it did we support the Quigley submission, which it looks as though we have, but you're saying that we didn't, and that's what's confusing me to one extent. And also, I'm just clarifying that we are saying that we want to go ahead with the discount, but on page 33 again, that second bullet point on that page, the stormwater differential remains under review by the council, as discussed below in section 3 of this report. However, for now, no change to the draft development and financial contributions policy is recommended by officers, pending further analysis of the issues and implications of any changes, including further consultation as may be deemed necessary. So,
Yes, so
what does that mean?
As I understand it, council officers are intending to continue to look at the stormwater differential, but the recommendation is that that work program will need to continue beyond adoption of this policy. So no changes are recommended at the moment. There is a program of work where that will be considered more fulsomely. It does require technical input. It is likely to need consideration by this council as to whether further consultation will occur, because there may be changes to how the DC policy is applied in certain areas. So that work is ongoing and was not ready to come with this particular policy. So there are no changes at this stage, but council officers are signalling that that work will continue and that there might be an update in due course.
Can we clarify what no changes at this stage means? Because no changes to the draft policy, it appears to be,
yes,
which is a change to the current situation. So when you say no changes, what it's because this is the draft policy that we came out with a couple of years ago was to have an infill incentive, a discount in the infill area. Looks like we are going ahead with that here.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
we are.
Yes.
So the incentive remains,
Yep.
but as I understand it, officers have signalled that they are looking at stormwater generally and how they're going to be able to fund that, and that there is a work program underway that might revisit that at some point, but not at this stage.
Right.
There is no change.
Okay, and then I still question the boundary looking at the map.
Yeah, the decision just on the intensification area, I'd have to go back and
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused. Maybe you could explain it more. So that map in the back of the policy is the intensification area. So you're referring to the Quigley submission, which asks why other areas of East Street are not included.
Yeah, which initially when we went out, we used north, south, east, west basically as our boundary for the intensification area.
Yep.
And the Quigleys suggested that that was a little unfair, that it shouldn't be East Street. It should actually go down to the river, if you like. So it should include Wellington Street, Nelson Street, Poole Street, etc. And when I'm looking at this plan, which is a little hard to read, it appears that that has happened. But I stand to be corrected. I'm just really looking for clarification.
If we could put the map up, Michael could point to it.
Because
I think you're right.
if I'm wrong, there would be pink to the east
Yeah.
of the intensification area.
That's right. And I think the map shows that intensification area goes beyond East Street now.
Okay, so we've accepted the Quigley submission, but there's no reference to the fact that we have anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd have to go back to the original map.
Must have been a well-written submission.
Yeah.
Shane, perhaps we'll look into that and
Yeah.
explain that to it later.
Okay. But in terms of the 0.65, you'll recall the the infrastructure team did a bit of a presentation on stormwater not so long ago to council, and we're still a little bit unsure of the actual impact of intensification on stormwater and what that might result in terms of growth costs rather than just what we've got. So at the moment, we just are not in a position to be able to put a hand on heart and say that it should be 0.65, it should be 0.75, 0.85. We've just got to complete that work so that we are actually bringing fact to council rather than assumption.
But we are going ahead with 0.65.
We are going ahead with 0.65, but we were signalled that through intensification, it could, through stormwater in particular. Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm slightly surprised, but I'm comfortable with what you're saying. Yeah. But I'm and then the boundary thing, if we can clarify that. But yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And I just like to say I concur with Councillor Ford's comments. I was initially a great supporter of the discount for intensification for infill, but to be honest, I think we need to relook at the boundaries that are currently listed here, and actually until we're actually aware of what the implications of our stormwater capacity are, because we've been told that pretty much we're at capacity in places, is that I actually don't see the need for us to actually offer a differential until we know actually what it's going to be. So poking a figure out that we might have to increase, I don't think is the greatest of ideas, is only my view. Going back to a couple of other points, I agree with Councillor Blackmore's comments about simplicity, because it is quite complex, and I think it's very easy for us as well as the public to get lost in the bureaucracy of the complexity of what's put in front of us. But I'd like to just seek clarification on Councillor Ford's earlier commentary around units, perhaps in town that are in one title and then subdivided. And what I've now become a little bit unclear about, might be a bit early in the morning for me, is that the actual definition of creating a unit, a housing unit equivalent, because if you don't create demand, surely it's always zero. And it doesn't matter whether it's in town, out of town, up in space, wherever, if there's no actual extra demand on services, that to me equals no demand. Councillor Ford's couple of comments that he gave were a prime example of simplicity actually going out the door, to quote Councillor Blackmore. And I just don't get how we can have anything that in any way doesn't recognise no extra demand on services.
If I may, Your Worship, there, thank you for that, Councillor. And I've actually been reflecting on that point while the discussion has been ongoing. But you're correct in part, in the sense that the DC policy only applies if you're a development in the first instance. And so development is defined by the generation of demand. And one of the reasons why I said that an applicant, when Councillor Ford was speaking, would be able to rely on the policy, go and see council officers, look to see whether or not there was an avenue of how to manage that. It might be that that development isn't a development for the purposes of the DC policy, and there would be no demand, and therefore you wouldn't have any hue generated. So I think that it is a case-by-case situation, and you do need to first of all get through that threshold test that we've spoken about previously, which is that you are a development which either alone or cumulatively with another development will have the effect of requiring expenditure on infrastructure and is provided for in the DC policy.
Well, I think the other comment that Councillor Blackmore actually made was around what cost, because again, whatever we do, it should be, in my view, simply upfront so that Joe Public can understand it. And I think having a process or accepting a process that requires a lot of fishtailing, delving around, changing tyres, doing whatever, is actually just becomes complex. And whenever that happens, you can guarantee there's cost involved. And whatever approach we take to this should be, you know, as cost neutral as possible to people that are actually wanting to do whatever they're wanting to do. So anyhow, those are just my thoughts.
So, you know, just reiterate that we, through our levels of service, provide a very high component of rate funding to the planning team for exactly that sort of advice, and why we encourage people to come in and sit down and have those pre-lodgement meetings with the team around consents and to work through these. And the team will take an applicant through the development contributions, and they have templates which they work through, so they can explain to the applicant the development contribution and how it applies. I don't think you'd ever produce a development contribution policy that the average person could read and still, you know, cover everything you need to on a policy. So that's the best thing we can do and it's way better for us to sit down and talk face to face with an applicant around exactly, because then they can ask questions, they can understand, and that's why that service is there. You know, we do a lot to encourage that, and I think the team gets pretty busy. Oliver can probably attest to that around, you know, some of those inquiries, and that's what it's for. So I think, you know, that's the place I'd like to make sure effort is put.
Well, last comment, just perhaps on the first page of the development contributions policy, we should actually make that clear to the public so they know the first thing they should do is come in and actually talk to council rather than try and understand something that's probably not that understandable. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Short.
Thank you. Just getting back to the questions that Councillor Ford raised about the infill incentive area. With the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which I don't have on hand, we are encouraged to enable infill. In that document, is there anything about incentivising infill?
No.
Is that, don't expect an answer today, but is that something we could check and see how it aligns with whether or not we're going to adopt an incentive area?
No, because it's not about DC.
Yeah, I think your DC, this is how you fund infrastructure to support growth, which is slightly different, except for the NPSUD does require developments to be infrastructure ready. So,
I guess that once we do our growth study, we'll have a bit better an idea, but it is working out where the demand is. So I guess that's what was at the.
And when you prepare your DC policy, officers do look at the district, and they, you know, Hamish will be able to speak to this more eloquently, I'm sure, but they do look at where demand is forecast and what that demand is for, and they do allocate costings and their DCs in accordance with that. So
I think most of us would agree there's unlikely to be a lot of infill in the villages. The demand would be infielding. So,
Councillor Belsky.
Yeah, thanks for today. I just want to, sometimes I get a bit confused where we're up to on these things, but just the Kimbolton submission, Tony Wall brings out some quite alarming statistics. And in the period between 2018 and 2021, council only spent 14% of the development contribution levies to villages and rural. However, more concerning is the planned projects for the next 20 years of only 1.12% is to be spent on rural villages projects, etc., and 98.8% on fielding urban projects. Now, looking through a submission, which he's broke down into where they've gone, Mount Lees is 22,000 for this last year, Himatangi Walkway 136,000, and Himatangi Walkway 2425. But Kimbolton is growing like all the other villages, and they made an application for a shower block because of all of the activities of sculpture festivals and etc. and motorhomes coming in. Now, I've been told quite firmly that a shower block like that coming in behind the Orewa Clubroom block, which council owns the land, and their sewerage upgrade wouldn't fall into this category. But looking at what they have been spent on in Fielding, basically it's been on reserves, it's been on footpaths and things. Can you clarify that this does not include that type of growth infrastructure?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No.
Well, that's disappointing because it is growth, and there is money being contributed to this development fund, and I think it's quite serious that a lot of it's been spent in the Fielding area at town.
So, councillors, just going back to the submissions, there's probably a couple that you might just want Shannon to comment on. And those were the ones made by Mr. Key, both in submission, but also there was a follow-up email that was sent to councillors. The response to his original submission is there, but they were legally focused submissions. So while Shannon's here, it's probably best that I get her to answer any questions that you might have, and also in respect to that email, which was kind of similar but not, if you like. So if there is any, perhaps we could address those now, unless you want to say anything.
No, not at this stage, but I wonder whether it would be helpful to potentially take the councillors to that part of the deliberations, which you're Annex 1. What page is that on the new?
47.
47. So these are your submissions that you need to consider with draft responses next to. And 41. And we've just had one addressed in terms of the Kimbolton Community Committee. And I guess it reflects a similar issue that's raised by Mr. Key, which is around what DCs are used for. So DCs are used to recover the costs associated with growth. And the focus of how you deal with your renewals is funded through different mechanisms. So DCs are collected to enable you to fund growth. And when council officers collate the information and produce the policy, they take into account a range of matters as directed by the Local Government Act as to how they then attribute growth and where. And it produces the schedule of assets that we have talked about previously, which sets out the infrastructure works or the works that are generated by demand, anticipated demand, where they are to occur, and the DCs that are attributed, when the DCs are collected, what they're going to be attributed and used for. So that's the fundamental process in the very simple terms that your officers go through. What Mr. Key has raised is that Mr. Key has suggested that council has misapplied itself, officers have misapplied itself on a number of occasions as to when setting its cost allocations, who will benefit and who creates the need for the assets. And you'll see in the response to the submission that council officers on our advice take a different reading of the Act to Mr. Key, and we disagree with his interpretation. In my view, that the council has complied with its obligations under 197AB, which sets out a range of principles that council officers and council need to have regard to. But essentially, the suggestion by Mr. Key is that, and he's referred to it recently in another correspondence to council, is that a summary of how council has looked at only those who directly cause growth. And he's referred to a slide and some summary statements within your consultation document and also a presentation to council. I want to reassure councillors that what you're adopting and considering today is the policy. It's not a summary of the policy. It's not a slide that council officers have presented to you, which provides a snapshot summary of it. It is the policy. And when you read the policy in its totality, it sets out the relevant principles that the Act requires you to consider. It shows the workings, particularly in part 2, that council officers have worked through in identifying growth, attributing costs to it, and allocating that across your communities. In my view, the policy does meet your obligations when read in its totality, as opposed to picking pieces out of summary documents or slides. So that, in essence, is the response to Mr. Key's submission. You'll see we've read a section of the Act differently to him in that response that was provided. And we've gone on with the advice of council officers, having spoken to them, to draw Mr. Key's attention to Schedule 2, for example, of the draft policy, which shows how projects have been weighted in contemplation of the requirements under Section 197AA and 197AB. There's a cost allocation section of the policy we've referred them to, and we've shown some examples about where, yes, there are projects that have been assigned 100% funding because it's all growth, but there are also projects where it's been weighted differently. So the policy, when you read it in its entirety, actually is illustrative of the weighting processes that officers go through. And I just encourage you to view it in a holistic form, as you are entitled, and as you should, in my view, and take confidence in the work that your officers have done.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
On page 48, we've got a fantastic explanation of what the word "and" means. And it's either conjunctively or disjunctively. Now, I'd just like perhaps a really simple, for me, explanation of that little part, because I think it's rather crucial to the whole thing, and I'm not really that clear. So up the top of your in your response,
Yes.
say the first half of the response on page 48.
Well, Mr. Key reads the provision and ensures that those who create the need for this infrastructure and directly benefit from our provision of infrastructure are those who pay for it. So it imports that you need to meet both. We say it should be read disjunctively, and we can put and ensure that those who create the need for this infrastructure and those who directly benefit from our provision of infrastructure are those who pay for it. So we don't say that you need to create and directly benefit are only those people that can that have to pay for it.
Those two sets of people, those who create and those who directly benefit, which could be the same, but not necessarily.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Which is consistent with, if you read the rest of, remembering that this is one principle as well. You need to read the section in its entirety, and I'd encourage council officers to do so. Also, I think it's important to note that the High Court has also said that the principles of the Local Government Act shouldn't be used as a threshold test in themselves to be met. And I think we don't want to elevate one principle as a pass go. It needs to be read in its entirety against the context of the Act. And so, in our view, our interpretation of that is more aligned with that. I'd also note that second, our other point is that the description of the cost, and this is important, the cost allocation exercise in the SOP is not determinative of whether council has complied with its obligations under the Act. Then I directed you to the policies within the policy itself, or how that allocation has occurred within the policy itself.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm quite comfortable with the response to John Key. And would I be right in saying, if we were to follow his line of thinking and his example, would it be that only those people with a disability should be paying for accessible toilets? So I'm not comfortable with that line of thinking at all. I suppose a reflection is that, you know, the inclusion of Schedule 2 in the policy provides opportunity for people to kind of start to pick apart some of the definitions, I suppose. I understand why it's there. My question is Schedule 1 and 2, reflecting on how long it's taken, I suppose, to review this policy in its totality. Schedules 1 and 2 could change more frequently. Are they able to be updated without a full policy review?
Schedule 2 is, yeah, the asset schedule and the costs associated are able to be reviewed through the annual plan process.
Okay.
The policy itself
Yep.
is a special consultative process that we'd have
Yep.
to go through differently. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a requirement that we review that every 3 years.
Yep. I suppose perhaps just reflecting on something that Councillor Short discussed earlier, the Rongatia plan change could create a different demand for us within that timeframe. So this would allow us to update the schedule based on the outcomes.
Absolutely, and that was something that is anticipated and expected, and that's why that flexibility has been provided.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just, Your Worship, go back to Councillor Ford's question, because I want to make sure that we're not speaking at cross purposes. The quote that we've debated with Mr. Key is a quote that's taken from the statement of proposal. It's not taken from the Act. What Mr. Key suggested was that in your statement of proposal, Council's misdirected itself as to how the Act applies. And we've said that the summary of proposal document could be read in the way that we've suggested. And I've encouraged you to go beyond the summary of proposal and look at your policy and the Act in itself. The summary of proposal description is not necessarily determinative. And in any event, we say it can be read in the way that we've suggested. So I just wanted to be clear that we didn't think we were interpreting a section of the Act. It was a statement from the summary of proposal. And that's described at the start of the letter on the previous page. At page 3 of your submission, you suggest that Council's statement of proposal indicates that Council was inappropriately fused these two considerations as it states. And then if you turn the page, we've set out there the statement. So I guess how you read that and the interpretation you apply to it is not, it's still important, but we're not interpreting the Act. We're not debating an interpretation of the Act.
I guess I've had concerns that basically to address, say, Mr. Key's concern, we need to bring a lawyer in because none of us are capable of interpreting it. And so that was my initial concern. However, I do take the point that the person who's raising all this is a lawyer, and so you perhaps need a lawyer to fight a lawyer. So I have gained a greater level of comfort, I suppose. But yeah, that was a couple of weeks ago. I was quite concerned in that regard. But I accept your explanation. I get the gist of it. I don't profess to understand it, and I'm not even going to try.
Yes, and that's the point I make around the second point, which I think is the most important point, as I said, which is that the cost allocation exercise in your statement of proposal, that wording is not determinative of whether you've complied with your obligations. And I think that's the other point. I can also reassure you that I'm not called in on every submission to give legal advice if it makes you feel better about that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Always good to see you, though.
Councillor Underwood.
Thank you. I am concerned about the rural communities. 3 of them made really good submissions, and they've all received pretty much the same answer. The DC contribution is required when a need is created. And firstly, in the rural area, you're not told what that need is for a start. You're just told you're creating a need. The refund policy creates a mechanism by which you can have your DC refunded if your development, sorry, what does it say here? If the council does not provide the reserve or network infrastructure for which the development contributions were required. So in the rural community, it's a bit unfair if you're not told what your need is that you're creating. I mean, you know, you're paying for infrastructure and reserves, and therefore I think you should be able to see that that's going to happen in the future. Also, the explanation around what is growth and what is an increased level of service. So the example given there was if your rural community doesn't have footpaths and because of growth you want some footpaths, well, that's an increased level of service because you never had footpaths. But the 3 rural communities that have submitted all have existing footpaths, and therefore, for instance, I know of a street where there's now 3 new houses that have been put there in the last 16 years, and a footpath is required for safety because it's a street that extends from the school. That would not be an increased level of service by the definition because the village already had footpaths. It would just be new footpaths because of growth in that area. My interpretation of what it's saying there. And Councillor Bielski was saying about the percentage that is being spent on these rural areas. And I think it mentions here on page 45 in the Halcombe answer, 20-year development and contributions planning period. Do we know whereabouts we are in that 20-year period at the moment?
I think there's some things we need to go back to first. Quite some years ago when council was considering its development contribution policy, when these were first introduced, there were areas, particularly in respect to stormwater, where you would be collected the development contribution amount in that area, you could spend only in that area. That really isn't feasible, and it's very difficult when you are trying to operate a whole of district infrastructure. And so those areas were done away with, and we applied a whole of network approach, and that is filtered through some of our rating categories as well. Council also determined that growth is a positive and needed to occur in the district. And a good example of that is recently when you've considered your rates, you know, it was 8.44, but because of the growth of 1.5, it came down to 6.9. So that impact of growth and the more that's occurred has now allowed us to spread the rating impact across more ratepayers. So growth was considered positive. And if that impact of being able to spread costs across the district, then the whole of district approach to development contributions to pay for that growth should apply. It's because everybody benefits. So the person at Hamatangi on a small block, their rates will be a little bit less because they're spread over the growth. Now that growth, as people have said previously, predominantly has occurred in the precinct 4 area in terms of the substantial amount of growth. So that's where the investment's gone, and the district has paid for that growth. So the district has got the benefit from the growth. So we don't apply development contributions. So if you get, development contributions you get, say, from Rangitia are only spent Rangitia, or from Halcombe only spent Halcombe, it would not work like that. You would never collect enough money to do what you want to do potentially in each of those areas, because the growth is not great in some of those areas. So that's the position council took. If council wants to re-look at that through its LTP process, it has huge connotations if you do, because it also starts impacting on some of your rating assumptions as well.
And I understand what you're saying, and I understand that DCs get pulled and there's a priority thing, but there is still growth happening in those villages and they need to see something down the line. I understand the targeted whatever approach that you're using and all the DCs, but if you subdivide in Hamatangi or Kimbolton, you're not creating a need in Fielding, and therefore you're creating a need in your community, you should be able to see in this 20-year plan that something will happen down the line. Helcom put in a huge amount of work and said that at the moment there's 60 odd consents going through at that point in time. So the growth is happening, and I think these rural communities should be given the assurance that they haven't been forgotten and that there will be something in the plan further down the line. And that's why I was asking about this 20-year development planning period, because I can't remember which submission it was because they've all been slightly different. It might have been Helcom. We're seeing the growth in your area. The response to that being more in the 15 to 20 years of this planning period rather than this first 5 years, because as you said, Precinct 4 is taking priority at this time. But there is still a need in the rural communities, and Councillor Bell, she said in the next 20 years, was it, that 1.8% is going to be spent rurally?
So
Helcom said
it's
that-
identifying that need though. Just because we have growth doesn't mean to say that the need
Is
what is
immediate.
the need. So that's what the infrastructure team do. They go through, and it is 20 years, Hamish, isn't it? 20-year planning.
Yeah, Shane, it is. It's a 20-year sort of rolling plan reset at each LTP. So we work on that 20-year period. It doesn't have a fixed end date and then nothing after that. And I think as part of that regular review, and as Shane said before, we can look at the DC schedule of works every year as part of the budget setting for the annual plan. But one of the problems that you have with regard to, say, network planning and roading is that because of the sporadic nature of development across the wider district, you don't necessarily know from 1 year to the next where that increase in demand on the network is going to hit and which intersections need to be upgraded. Over a period of time, as you review this year after year and LTP after LTP, you do form a picture of where that growth is developing and where the need is. And that's when those projects are added into the schedule. Slightly different with water and wastewater and stormwater. And then certainly parks is another discussion as well. But in the roading space, which is quite topical, that really is a sort of see where the development comes based on what the market is doing and what the landowners are subdividing, and then respond to that, which is very different to, say, Precinct 4 and Fielding, where council is deliberately rolling out lead infrastructure in a greenfield development kind of way. We can see it, we can plan for it, we can invest in it. Whereas outside of those main urban centres, it's very hard to do that without spending a lot of money on intersections that may not have the demand on them for 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the track.
Can I just respond? I agree, that's true, but that's what I'm saying, that, you know, I think rural communities would be a lot happier if they could see something down the line being planned, especially when you can see these rural communities, you know, growing so fast. And would you agree then that asking for footpaths and lighting and reserves in rural communities that already have those services would be growth and not an increased level of service?
Through you, Your Worship, if you're extending a footpath or you're extending a street lighting network to respond to growth going in a certain direction, yes, that is exactly what we're doing here in Fielding. If you look north, and that scenario would apply if there was that rollout infrastructure in the village areas. But where you're getting a couple of houses here and a couple there, and then a lifestyle block out of town, it's very hard to have that clarity of where the lead infrastructure would go. And it comes to a full circle back to the level of service versus growth. But it is
so therefore those submission answers aren't entirely correct for those 3 communities that have responded, because they already have lighting, footpaths and reserves.
Yeah, so again, if all of the growth was coming in a certain area and it was an extension of those services through, that is growth related. But if it was one here and one there, then possibly not. So
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you. Probably just a reflection of mine. Councillor Underwood, I shared your kind of concerns as I read through this. And I went round and round in my own head about, you know, what's the right thing for those communities. And I think I really landed on the fact that it's really hard to consider something in isolation. So you know, this being about our DC policy, essentially for certain things, but there are other things that we might do through annual plan submissions that might service the needs of those villages. And I think for me, I just reflected on how important it is when we are involved in those processes and approving things and considering things, that we aren't just doing that in isolation of the current topic, I suppose, is because I didn't have a solution. I couldn't land on something that was better than this in my own head.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor McFadyen.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. I think the issue is this, that the villagers have an expectation that all the money is spent in their region. But obviously, if the region grows, then the demand on the roading and other services and fielding has a cost. And those costs are hard to translate or hard to communicate to those communities. And I see us as part of that the new 10-year plan is for us to actually really have an input as to what direction, you know, we put up an individual list of what was important to us all. And that really is where we should actually focus as councillors, to sit there and say what is important. We've also invited the communities through the community groups to come back and feed back to us as to what's important to them. But I also take on board that you can't spend what you don't know. And whilst we have plans to go for, we have plans to grow the villages, we also have some other factors that we've got to consider. For example, if you look at Halcombe, subject that always seems to come up, is that there's a lot of plans to expand, but there's no plans to expand the school. So we're really in a juggling act. We're really trying to balance these whole sort of areas. But I do take the point that they do have an expectation, and quite rightly so, but also they do get the benefit, for example, with the new effluent system, where that's harmonised, and the local community here, actually the urban people, are really subsidising that. And as we go through the stormwater exercise in Halcombe, if you looked at the total cost of the stormwater, you would sit there and say there would be no way in the world that they could afford to fix the cost of stormwater in Halcombe or Sanson or anywhere else, because it would just blow the rates disproportionately out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Your Worship. My comments very much support Councillor Blackmore and Councillor McFadyen, that we have this discussion, well, ever since I've been involved in council, and I think it's a mistake to look at, when we're considering the villages, etc., it's a mistake to look at the development contributions on their own. The people don't understand, neither should they, the difference between increased levels of service or growth, etc. That's an internal thing for us to try and grapple with, renewals. But there are other things, and we've just heard from Councillor McFadyen, where fielding subsidises the villages, and there's harmonisation of rates, etc. So I think it would be useful, and I have discussed it with the ELT, for perhaps a presentation from officers to us at a workshop in the not too distant future, in terms of what do the villages receive in total. So partly from development contributions, partly from increased levels of service, partly from harmonisation of rates, etc., so that we have a better global picture, rather than arguing the toss over, in particular, say the harmonisation of rates, or on another day, the development contributions. Because, but I think it would be quite good for us to bring everything together in a presentation, so that we have a better understanding and we can explain it to our communities better.
You will get something very like that when we start debating our levels of service and through our LTP. So that's not too far away. But levels of service are the start of that conversation, because they are the ones that really dictate the cost, and you can land on those where you like. But then we will give you that information around rating harmonisation and the likes as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive.
Thank you, councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, no, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, look, I'd support those comments because at the end of the day, if we go back to growth creates demand, and growth in the villages actually also creates demand in township as well. So harmonisation, in my view, is actually the most pragmatic approach, and I guess that's what we try and do in most instances. But look, I just want to make one final comment for me. Back to Shannon on Mr. Key's comments, and I just thank you for the response as the recipient of Mr. Key's inquiry. Councillor Ford's quite right. It got far beyond any legal knowledge I have, which is pretty much as up, make it up as you go. But it was a response that actually required a legal response. And so I guess the only thing we could have done is probably got some answers to him a little bit quicker in the overall scheme of things. But it appears that Mr. Key's satisfied with the response at this point in time.
Well, if silence is golden, is the
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Councillor McFadden.
Thank you, Worship. Just to make pick up on Councillor Ford's point, we're tasked with actually rolling out this LTP to the community, and for us to do that effectively, we've got to have a good tool set of exactly how it all works. And so when we go and consult them and to take them on the journey, we need to really demonstrate that we do have their backs, and the big picture is the whole area and the community and the total communities as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
So is there anything else on the submissions? Because I'll just want to put up that revised number 5 for you.
Sure. Councillor Blackmore.
Yeah, thank you. A few of the submissions referred to, I know we talked about last time, but I'd like just to be clear, they referred to a couple of other policies under review. If you could just update on where they're at, please.
So they are coming back to council in a full, those 2 policies. Yep.
Okay, so will these responses go out before or after? Or?
Depends on what decisions you make today, councillor.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Councillor Ford.
I asked for clarification around the fielding intensification area. The map on page 118 is probably the best one. It appears that part of the Quigley submission has been agreed to and added, so the area has been added. Can I just seek clarification that is the case?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, the map that went out as part of the consultation did include the eastern side of the Fielding urban area, which included the Wellington Street, Nelson Street down through there. It didn't include the south of South Street and north of North Street. So the map that's referred to there in the submission response document is what was consulted on. So it partially addresses the submitter, but not fully in terms of the request for wider than north of North Street and south of South Street.
I really query that.
Okay.
But I suppose it doesn't matter in terms of what we're voting on today. So I'm okay with that. But
okay.
Why would the Quigleys make a submission asking for this if it was already in there? I mean,
so just to confirm, the Have Your Say page on our website is still live. So I went to previous consultations, checked that, and compared it to the document in your document set today, and they're identical maps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that being the case, we've got 5 recommendations on page 29. We're proposing some changes to recommendation number 5, which is now up on the screen. Councillor Quarry.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, there has been no dollar value put on the charges that are current each year. How is it that council haven't approved the annual charge that goes with the DC contributions in regard to roading and parks and reserves, i.e. each year we have to approve 1,001 different charges that council charges for that year, i.e. dog registration and dog pound fees and so forth. Yet we haven't, in my memory, approved a dollar value of the charges that are charged to our ratepayers.
Can I refer that to
through-
Hamish?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So in response to Councillor Corey, the annual fees set for development contributions are adopted by council each year as part of the fees and charges. They may not be discussed specifically, but they are in that document.
They are for
this year's-
stormwater, water and sewerage. They have never been for roading and for parks and reserves.
I will check that, but I'm not sure I agree, councillor.
And they're coming next fortnight.
And as part of, and as part of the reports coming following this discussion to the council meeting June 15th, there'll be the adoption of the specific fees and charges for the development contributions across the 5 activity areas for the next financial year, starting 1 July this year.
Have we got one for this year and the previous year? And
Yes,
the
I
year
believe
before
we do
that?
through the fees and charges that were adopted by council. And I will check online with what's there now. Happy to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so looking at recommendation number 5. Okay, so we have these 5 recommendations. I'm assuming we can take them all together unless there's any thinking otherwise. That being the case, can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Blackmore.
Yep, thank you. I move that the council receive this report and the submissions on the draft development financial contributions policy. Secondly, that the council considers and makes decisions on the matters raised in submissions and by officers of the draft development and financial contributions policy. Third, that the proposed amendments to the draft development and financial contributions policy 2021, shown with an Annex 3 to this report, be included in an updated policy for adoption by council. Fourth, that the council considers and decides whether it should reconsult on post-consultation changes to the draft development and financial contributions policy. And the fifth, that the council notes that the schedule of future assets to the draft development and financial contributions policy is indicative only, and the updated schedule of future assets will be presented to council for consideration for adoption at the council meeting on 15th of June 2023.
Thank you. Shane.
Just in number 4, that should actually be a decision where council confirms that it will not consult or it wants to consult, so there's a decision required in 4. So I think we just need some wording there that council, the council decides not to further consult on post-consultation changes. So to the development contribution policy. In other words, you're accepting what you've got and you're not making a decision to go back out and reconsult.
And if it helps, the reasons for that are set out. You would have seen it, paragraph 5.6 of page, what was 27, where council officers took you through the significance and engagement policy requirements in relation to the changes that you've made post-consultation, and determined that the changes are not of substantial significance, and that an appropriate level of engagement with the community would be to inform.
Thank you. So noting those changes in recommendation 4. So we have a mover. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor McFadyen. Is there any further comment, discussion? Put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motions are carried. Thank you. Really good discussion, complex topic. And I guess the message that I've heard is that while we have to deal with this specifically, some of the questions that are being raised today need to be put into context with the whole council processes and how we manage things. And I understand that we'll get more clarification around that in future meetings. So I thank you for that. Thank you, Shannon, for putting up with our questions, etc., and helping to make it as understandable as possible. So with that, I'm going to adjourn our meeting for morning tea, please.
You want me to do it again?
Right, thank you. We'll reconvene our meeting. We're at 11.3. This is the Camp Rangi Woods Trust appointment on page 186. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this paper is just technical paper. As you know, Council in March 2021 agreed to exit Camp Rangi Woods Trust. And it's taken us a while to negotiate that exit, but we have the exit process in place now. And during that period of time, we didn't reappoint the MDC trustees to that trust. And in order to complete the exit process, we need to appoint somebody to the trust. And so we're recommending that we appoint Shane so that then we can complete the exit.
Thank you. Reasonably straightforward. Any questions, comments? Councillor Underwood.
I don't think it was clear in there that the camp is still going to continue to operate even though we are exiting.
That's correct. There's likely to be potentially another trust set up.
Thank you.
Just to, it's become a little bit more complicated than what perhaps we thought it might be. The reason the council MDC was a trustee of the original trust was because the reserve was not vested. The reserve was put under statutory management for council MDC at the day. So in other words, DOC reserve and council administered it. There was a process that underwent where that responsibility was transferred to Horizon. So essentially MDC didn't have a role to play as it would have in the normal trust. So the council made a decision to withdraw from the trust. The problem is that council never appointed any trustees because they were going to withdraw. The trouble is you have to have trustees before you can enact the requirements of the trustee. So it's kind of, you have to be in before you can be out. And so we're just trying to clear all that up and get ourselves legally robust. Shannon's working with us on that, along with the YMCA, and the other trustee of the day now doesn't exist. It's been gone for some years, but YMCA got some difficulties as well because their trustee appointment process has been, well, it hasn't been one really. So we just got to get that legally right before we can then, because there's assets involved in all.
Yep. Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Look, I think this is pretty straightforward, really. I'm just happy to whack straight into the recommendation, if I may. And I'd move that council appoints Manawatu District Council Chief Executive as MDC's trustee representative to the Camp Rangi Woods Trust to enable progress to exit the trust.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Short. Any further discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Right, we move to item 11.4. These are our Lagoima requests for the past month. We're on page 190. Welcome, Mel and Francis.
Good morning, everyone.
So we'll take the report as read, but you're welcome to point out any highlights and then we'll take questions.
No major highlights. A busier month than the previous one before, which we were working through a number of those requests the last time I gave my report. So again, another busy month coming up as well. A number of requests through from the Taxpayers Union. Some of their timing not quite right because we haven't quite finished our 23 financial year. So I expect that we might get those when they want the kind of final figures again for our year. One request through from staff about dogs at a Seddon Street property that was related to a police incident there. So we just approached that with a little bit of extra kind of caution. And I think that's really the highlights from that month. you have any questions?
Excellent, thank you. Any questions, comments, please? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a love-hate relationship with Taxpayers Union, and today is the hate part of it. And my question is, can we perhaps have an estimate? I see the number of requests that they have here. How difficult would it be? Because I don't want to put you to a lot of work, but to just get an estimate of what their requests costs us in perhaps a month or a year or something like that, because I wish to take it up with them, that they're all about saving money in the public service, and yet they're actually creating a lot of cost.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if it's difficult and it's time consuming, just forget my request. But if it's easy enough, it would be something I would like to do. At least have them on.
Yeah, I think that that would be relatively easy for us to do, because we're looking at one, if we're looking just at that one specific requester. And I'd say a number of those requests are relatively simple for us to pull together. We have that information quite readily available. The HR team do a great job with a lot of those ones, but I can definitely reach out to the kind of key people that respond to those requests and get a bit of an idea for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Underwood.
The withdrawal by Brad here, just wondering if that was because he was going to be charged, because like I see it's 2 years worth of information and it'd be quite a big.
Yes, so we did go back to him with a view to charge him if he wanted us to pull all that together. We actually got around that with Brad meeting with Matt Mackay to discuss his issues and things anyway. So I think that was a better outcome in that situation anyway, than us needing to charge and pull all that info together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell.
Morena. Just a question on University of Auckland's request on security. Did that include digital and cyber security from Fabio?
That was related to, let me just familiarise, CCTV footage, of which we gave kind of quite a general response, and we held back some of the information around specifics, the types of cameras that we have available, those sorts of things. So we were giving information in general, but not anything too specific. I think I've got the right one.
Thank you, Councillor Hadfield.
Nothing too serious here, but I was quite intrigued to see that we pay $4,500 to APRA for the license to play a bit of music. And if that's the case, I wonder if we shouldn't pipe a bit of music through the loudspeakers to get our money's worth. Just a thought, just for a bit of levity on the situation.
So, and that's every business in town. Doctors, surgeries, hairdressers who play music have the same fee.
We actually have two licenses. So because we use because the pool use it for their classes and things, they have a different level of license because they're wanting to be more specific about the types of music they're using as well. So.
Right, so we have a recommendation on page 190. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Ford.
Your Worship, I move that the report detailing the requests for information received under the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 from 15th of April 2003 to 10th of May 2003 be received.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hadfield. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Motion is carried. Thanks, team, for your good work. We have no late items, so we can go to item 13, which is to move into public excluded. And I'm happy to move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely confirmation of previous minutes and the purchase of Fielding High School land for a walkway. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ford. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried. Thank you.